Phew, that was one hell of an episode. Welcome to the 5th episode of the First Customer Club. I'm Luke Bohaneke, and I just want to say, thanks for showing up. This channel is dedicated to bringing you ridiculously cool stories of entrepreneurs in the trenches, how they found, kept, and grew their first customers, first users, and in this case, their first investors. So, Bryce North, wow, what a story. I actually went to university with this guy. I owned his domain for a while, for crying out loud. You should tune into this episode to hear from Bryce North how he raised millions of dollars from investors in more than one startup, from VCs to angels and more. He'll share with you when and how to raise money from investors, how he raised $750,000 on Kickstarter, his behind-the-scenes experience on the popular show Dragon's Den, and how he beat me in every single pitch competition we literally ever entered. This guy's costing me money. Bryce was the founder of TrapTap, a device that sits on your dash to save you cash. Think radar detectors, speed traps, school zones. And Bryce is currently the founder of Don't Be a Little Pitch. I just finished his master course on how to pitch investors and close investment rounds. And I gotta say, in terms of a one-stop shop, this is it. So check out Bryce's site in the description. Like this video right here and right now. If you've gotten this far, subscribe to our little channel if you haven't already, and leave some juicy feedback with topics for future videos or guests to have on the show. Peace. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Here we go a second time, 2 days in a row, Bryce. I hope we get it right.
Hey, let's make this work.
100%. Yeah, excited to chat with you because we could be talking about how to get your first customer, and we will, but you're also an expert on a complementary topic, which is how to get your first investor. Did you think that when you were going through university at the same time as me, did you think fast forwarding, you'd be helping companies raise a couple $1 million, or how was that planned out for you, buddy?
No, not at all. Honestly, during university, my number one fear, like everyone else, was public speaking. It was getting up in front of class. It was pitching and presenting to people. I hated it. I sucked at it. I would stutter and stumble and just be absolutely terrified. So fast forward today, do I think that I'd be helping people pitch it in front of a room of investors, or do pitch competitions in front of a group of audience, or even one-on-one presentations? Not at all. So it's pretty exciting that I actually got here.
Wow, that's phenomenal. And I know we've talked about this before, but just to confirm, you haven't had any, formal training in this. It sounds like you've just learned, as you said, you've learned basically from failure. You learned from the ground up just by doing it. You weren't necessarily a pitch star the first time. Sort of walk us through, how many times have you pitched? I know you've won almost every competition, and you alone have cost me probably 10 to 20 grand of prize money, but how many times have you pitched, and sort of what does that track record look like for you?
Oh God, I can't even give you a number. I mean, I'm obviously in the hundreds right now. I've done the full circuit. I've been in Canada. I've applied for, entered, and pitched across Canada. I've done the circuit in the US. I've placed nationally and internationally, and I've actually even been invited across the world in places like Vietnam to go teach and pitch out there as well. So yeah, I've just done it so many times, but prior to that, failed so many times to actually learn what to do right.
Yeah. Have you broken it down to a formula in terms of how you are winning pitch competitions? Because whether it's 10 people competing or 75 people competing, it's often your name that ends up on top. And that's just unbelievable. Have you boiled it down to a science? Are you able to share your secret?
Yeah, you know what? It kind of relates to the same thing as being someone who has a background in sales and marketing. It's the same thing with getting your first customer or your first client. Honestly, it's just possibly showing the right way of telling a story. That is, can you articulate and tell your story in a way that resonates with the audience? And can you actually touch on every single point that they want to hear? So I want to rewind that just a bit. When we're pitching to an audience, who are they, what do they like, and what do they want to hear, and tailoring your pitch to that. And that's a lot of time my biggest mistakes, is not knowing exactly who we're talking to. So that's number one. And then number two is just feeding the information that they want to hear based on the metric points, the story highlights and storyline is the biggest thing. So when we compile that together, a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of business people make these mistakes, especially in their pitches into their customers, is that they focus too much on their product, they focus on themselves, and they don't go through the proper story swings that a pitch should have, right? Coming through the
Yeah.
problem identification, villainize the problem, make your solution or the person listening the hero of this story here, and keep them interested along the way by having open-ended loops. And I'm excited to talk a little bit more about that as this conversation goes along, but the idea is just to keep it open and keep it engaging.
100%. I hope you can see my screen right now, but I
Yeah.
wanted to put it in your face how many times you've won awards, how many times you've had honors in winning these competitions. This is a screenshot taken from your LinkedIn profile. So, and when I saw this, it absolutely demolished me and put me to shame. So congrats on building that up. And I guess, when you're, it starts with that first one and you've had a lot of experiences. I've done a lot of pitch competitions too. And I haven't got it down to a science like you. For example, I try to memorize my pitch, but I'm not sure if I should be, because if you memorize it too much, maybe it comes across as too canned. Do you have any advice about that? Should you memorize a pitch? Should you not?
I think you need to know certain components down cold, but no, you should not know your storyline complete memorized line by line. And why I say that is a lot of times you'll get a question that throws you off your path, right? So you start down your problem identification, you move into your business model, and the next logical step when you're pitching an investor, for instance, would be moving to your traction points and your market size. But someone may come up and say, well, how's it better than your competition? Right? Or, how are you better in this way? Or tell me more about your team. And that just throws off your story and your pitch. So you got to learn how to pivot that conversation and still at the same time tell your story that's engaging. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the whole purpose behind that.
Yeah. And I also know that you believe that it should be one person pitching and not a whole group of people. Hey, you have a team of five.
Yeah.
It's you shouldn't be, it's not a synchronized swimming exercise. It's one person crushes that pitch. Maybe somebody else participates in the question and answer. That's what I see a little bit more. Maybe you have a CTO with you who answers the technology specific questions. But why specifically do you think that? Does it just throw off the rhythm of the pitch when you have more than one person chime in?
Yeah, it really throws off that rhythm. And I've gotten a few golden nuggets of advice from some best pitchers out there and also some investors. And the whole idea behind your pitch is you have to keep it simple. Keep it like you're pitching to a 6-year-old. And so I'm serious about that. When your presentations get really technical, or when you're pitching anything you're talking about, you need to dumb it down, and not in a bad way, but in a sense that makes the other person not feel like they're not smart, right? Because if you come with them with a lot of technical jargon and you play them down a bit, they're going to get a little more defensive. So how do you pitch in a way that makes it super easy for them to understand and super easy for them to follow? So when you're using more than one person to pitching, those transitions are just sometimes messy and gets confusing, and you're trying to go back and forth. And when there's a time limit, we always waste too much time, switching over. Rule of thumb: if it's under 20 minutes, try to keep it to one person, the CEO. Have a technical side for Q&A, but have that one lead of content, tell that story and resonate with the audience, because you're building that rapport and you're building that rapport. So if that person's connecting with you deeply and someone else comes in, you now need to establish that new connection, establish that new trust.
Makes sense. So it helps if you're likable, right? Because it's not just what you say, but it's how you say it. It's connecting with the audience. It's all of that stuff. Yeah, and I've seen you do that extremely well. And I think one reason why you're great at pitching is for the reasons you mentioned, but to add on to that, I think you have great communication skills, like knowing how to phrase something that is dumbed down for a 6-year-old is, I think, easier said than done. We all hear you should do that, but we either forget it or we don't know how. You hear a lot of people that, they have a startup and they don't know how to explain it to their grandmother. I think that's a test. Whenever granny comes over for dinner, it's like, well, if I can't explain it in a way that she gets what we're doing, then maybe I should go back to the drawing board. Hey, and maybe if I don't understand it deep enough, maybe we don't know what we're doing ourselves, right? So maybe it takes, understanding your product, your business, your customer. Maybe it just takes a lot of learning to figure that out. Maybe a startup doesn't know their first day how to break it down to a 6-year-old. For me, I always think I learn that the more I talk to people, because if you talk to enough customers, you hear your business positioned enough unique ways, and eventually you figure out what resonates with people, right? Because there's
Yeah.
not, you don't always have a 20-minute pitch. One thing I loved about taking your master class at Don't Be a Little Pitch was, you clearly articulate the different types of pitches, right? You have your 140 character Twitter like pitch, and you also
Yeah.
have your long
Yeah.
pitch.
Let's focus on that for a second, because a lot of entrepreneurs are in their own minds majority of the time when it comes down to their own products and their own services and their own pitches. If you can't break down your pitch into 140 characters, which is called the Twitter pitch because we were limited to 140 characters, if you can't do that in a networking event, in an email, in a subject line, you have a really big problem. And a lot of us say that, oh, that's not too hard, but when push comes to shove, we can't do that. How do you describe your company in 2 sentences? Not easy a lot of times, and you need to be able to do that.
Yeah. Do you have any advice about how to figure out how to put it into 2 sentences? Is there
Yeah,
is there like an equation that you have, if these few variables you sub in and you're able to say we're X for Y, or how have you
that's
done that?
exactly it. Yeah, I mean, analogies, comparisons, anything like that that makes it really easy. So, as cliche as it sounds, but it works, is we are the Uber, we are the Airbnb for, we are the X for Y, right? It's kind of what we want. And so we can pull in the similarity to another company and kind of show them what we're doing in that industry. That works the best. Yes, it's cliche. Yes, it's overused, but is it understandable? Totally.
Yeah. And this is what, I've always liked as, talking first customer, first investor stuff is, for me, I've never figured that out day one though. I've always figured that out. Like, I remember my last startup, I had to go all the way down to Austin, Texas. And then someone's like, "Oh, you're like a Roomba for chicken." And immediately I was like, "How do I explain that we have this autonomous self-moving barn that's satellite enabled?" And someone in the back of the room just yelled, "Your Roomba for chicken." And immediately people imagine that little vacuum that runs across your house stuffed with chicken. And immediately I started testing that with other people, and not 100% of people got it, but let's say 75% of people knew immediately what we're doing. I guess the purpose of that Twitter pitch is to get to the next stage, right? It's to get them
Yeah.
interested to the tell me more. And maybe you want to share a few words of that, because the thing that I love about how you break down the different types of pitch is it's like every one is like teasing you to get to the next one, right? It's not like you give the Twitter pitch and you're expecting to get the meeting. You're giving the Twitter pitch so you can go to the next stage. It's like you take the customer journey when you're talking customer acquisition and you
Hmm.
spin it a little bit, and all of a sudden you have like an investor journey. You want to add to that?
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about open-ended loops, because I talked about that previously. And when you're, and Hollywood does this phenomenally, is that when you're actually pitching a story in the very beginning, and if any of you remember the show Lost, they did this very well where, in the beginning they had an issue and that wasn't solved yet. And before that actually was solved, another issue came on, right? And before that was solved, another issue. So it kept you open, thinking that, holy crap, when's this going to be solved? I need to know this answer. And then while you're thinking and searching for that answer, another one pops up. So that's what we go in peaks and do during our pitch and our presentations, is that we have a problem that needs to be solved. Just when we think we're about to solve it, we throw something in there that's really interesting, that's also needs to be solvable, and then again extends that interest level and that the attention span of the person you're pitching to want to hear a lot more. So when it comes down to our pitch, there's a pitch progression that everyone needs to follow. And a lot of times we love to give it right away when we're talking to an investor, but just like you said, you tease them a bit, show them a bit of that carrot, and their whole goal is to get that meeting. So when you meet somebody, usually you give your Twitter pitch, your quick 2 cents pitch, and that shows, engages interest. If they want to hear more, great, you can go into your elevator. If they love that 60, to 90-second elevator pitch and want to hear more, they're going to ask to see a deck. And once they see that deck and you have that put down, and you have all your information in there, that deck usually leads to a meeting, which leads to a funding decision. And again, within that deck, there are various formats of decks: 5 slide, 15 slide, 20 slide decks. It really matters what the investor's looking for. And I don't want to overcall this, but when it comes on the pitch progression, It's seeding the interest through a quick little snippet of what you're doing and hoping that they're asking for more information. Your pitch just gets longer and longer till that meeting.
And then hopefully you get somewhere to a term sheet, which we'll talk a little bit about the later stage of that shortly. You threw me off when you mentioned the show Lost, because that's actually the reason I stopped watching that show, because I kept watching and thinking that I am not progressing in this show. I felt like I felt like my knowledge level stayed the exact same level. So, maybe it's different when it's Hollywood versus a pitch, because for me, Lost really threw me off because it did the same thing every single time. For a pitch, I suppose when you meet an investor, you only have those few interactions. So if you can hook them the first time, they'll probably stay on board till the end. Lost, I don't think I made it past season 1, buddy.
I mean, a lot of times, I mean, especially with that show, if you miss an episode, you miss one little bit of information, it throws you off, right? So there's a way and a function and an area to tell stories that actually doesn't make it complicated, right? We're pitching to a 6-year-old, we're making it super simple, and there's a pitch progression and a format in your decks you must follow to a T, and a storyline and how you tell that. And that's where it gets really important. So we don't want to confuse. We don't aim to confuse. We aim to clarify.
Makes total sense. So that situation, we're talking basically elevator pitch style for that 140 characters. When you first decide you want to meet an investor, let's kind of go through the timeline a little bit. So you decide that you either need funding, you want funding, for whatever reason. Maybe let's start right there. What are the few most common reasons you might want to raise? Is it always, should you be waiting until the moment where you need cash? It seems like it should be more part of a strategy as opposed to, oh, geez, our burn rate is way too high, it's time.
Yeah, I mean, let me ask you, when you're looking to get married with somebody, Luke, I mean, do you, wait till you think you're ready in life and then go ask people to marry you and get down one knee, or do you build a relationship first and test the waters, right? And yeah, again, love cliches here, but the whole point behind this is that you need to build that relationship. And one of the other best pieces of advice I've ever got from an investor is that if you ask for investment, you'll get advice, and you ask for advice, you'll get investment. So what does that mean? I mean, you go to someone and say, hey, I'm looking for $1 million, and they're going to throw up their defenses. Then they're going to say, well, great, you need to fix this and this. Make sure you have an MRR of this, an ARR of this. I want to see these traction points. We need to slow it down. We need to take it back and build that relationship. And to do that, you start looking for money the day that you actually start starting your company, the day you open your doors, the day that you start working on your MVP. And what you do is that you head up to these investors, go on LinkedIn, go to networking events, ask for intros and warm leads, and just say, hey, I know you invest in this industry, or you invested in someone earlier. I know I'm not ready for investment yet, but I'm curious that if I were to get you as an investor, what would you be looking for in a company like mine? What are the traction points you need me to hit, right? And now we're asking for advice, and it makes them feel great. People in the startup world, entrepreneurs, we love to help each other. So the purpose of this is go and ask for advice, get on their radar. That's the most important part. And then you ask them exactly what they're looking for. You do this with a bunch of investors, throw them in an email marketing campaign or whatever you want to do. I have a lot of great recommendations for investor-related software for this, and you update them every quarter. And you update them according to the traction points they want to see, and just follow up, build that relationship, get them as advisors, ask them questions until you actually hit those points, and then you're ready to invest when you need the money. So start early.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Start early. Do you feel that there's a little bit of awkwardness when you are starting out? Because from my experience, when I've reached out to some investors, I'm not ready to pitch. I don't, I've started to put together what might be a future pitch deck, but there's a lot of gaps, right? I don't know my cost of customer acquisition. I don't know my lifetime value. I don't know some of these instrumental pieces that I know investors will want to see to ensure that, we're ready to put fuel on the fire, for lack of a better term. But at the same time, they want to see a pitch deck from me. So should I send them a pitch deck that I know has holes in it? Or should I tell them, hold off? How should I do that chicken and egg when I don't have what they want to see, but they want to see it anyways?
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing up there is that you always will have competition. So sidebar, if you say you don't have competition, you think you don't have competition, I'm going to break it to you. You're in the wrong industry here, and you probably need to reevaluate, the entrepreneur side of things, because everyone has competition, and we need to know how to recognize that. So your competition has these numbers. Go find out what they are. Go use those as benchmarks. Put together a plan. An investor looks for three things in a company. One, is this the right team to make it happen? Two, is the market big enough to grow in? And three, is there money to be made? So you need to put together a pitch deck, even if you have these numbers, that lays out a go-to-market strategy and plan showing what you want to hit or what you're looking for and what you're missing. Don't have your full team yet? Put in who you're looking for and the traits that you want. Don't have a stacked advisory board? Name the individuals that you actually would love to have on that team. Don't know what your cost of acquisition is? Name standard industry standard numbers, what your competitors have hit, and glorify them. This is not a place to shit on your investors. This is a place to show why they're great and why you're 10 times better. So there's information out there. We have access to this all over the internet. So we just need to formulate our pitch, include the right numbers. And if you're not ready, you don't fully have them yet, be open and honest and build that relationship. This is where we're at today. This is our phase 2, phase 3, phase 4 approach. These are the numbers we want to hit. We know this is attractive in the industry. I need some advice on this. I'm looking for this. Can you help me with this? We're here today, want to get here. How do you recommend we get here? There's so much money we think. What do you think? Build that relationship.
Yeah, it's not just leaving the expense slide blank, right? It's not just saying that we don't know what our cost of acquisition is. It's, saying we don't know, but here's what we do know. Here's what we're going to do to figure it out. And here's where we hope to be in 6 months, right?
That's just it. I mean, if you came to me and say, I have a brand new consumer electronic device that I want to do, let's say wireless headphones, for instance, right? The all of the rave right now. If you came to me, I mean, I could, because I know the IoT industry, come up with a big enough plan that talks fully about what the cost should be, what my logistics should be, what my shipment should be, where my distribution and my go-to-market strategy, what it should be. And investors want to invest in people. Remember, one of those 3 points, is this the right team to make it happen? If you do not have the strategy and the plan, you find a great investor or someone that you want to pitch to and you blow that, that's on you. And that is a huge problem. So how do we properly build these relationships and build our decks in the early stages and nurture that relationship into an investment is extremely important.
Makes sense. I've heard of a really good approach of reaching out to investors, and it's I think the terminology was called an entrepreneur advisory board, where you specifically look at you look at VCs that you think might be ideal for you. You look for VCs within the specific niches that are heavily invested in the particular areas that your product vision is moving towards. And you look at their portfolio companies and you figure out a way to meet some of these portfolio companies, because these are entrepreneurs that are often, 1, 2, maybe 3 steps ahead of you. They're not so far ahead where they've, already sold the company, but at least they figured out how to raise money from perhaps their first investor. You build a bit of rapport with them. They help you with the pitch deck. They know what that investor wants to see. And then you get an introduction a little bit down the line. Do you have any feedback on that type of approach?
Yeah, so a lot of times you'll get in the industry is a 3-strike approach, and I've seen a lot of people move into a 2-strike approach, meaning that if someone passes off a lead to an investor and they're not investable and it's a crap company or it's just a bad pitch, strike 1 on that referral person. And so no one wants to burn their network. And so, they say the best way to find investors is to find a mutual connection or someone we know. And that does work really well when pitch is fine-tuned and ready and you have a deck that's made for pitching. But a lot of times, I don't find it hard to cold call or cold email or even send a cold LinkedIn message to someone with the right tactics and format. And I go through that in quite detail in my course. You actually can go and on my LinkedIn or some of my YouTube videos and actually check out this format that I've mentioned there as well too. There's more detail within the course, but that's a really great way to get you started. Reaching out and getting the attention of people you want to talk to is a sales game and not hard if you know how to structure a message, right? And stop making it about me. We're doing this, we're growing at this. There's a certain way to structure that piques interest, that invites them to want to learn more.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you were able to save your drink from yesterday, Bryce, but I got mine here. Our thirsty Buddha.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So
You
it
were
tastes good to get old.
there we go. You were telling me that you're on a little bit of a health kick, so I wasn't going to get the strong alcohol, wasn't going to whip the booze out, but I thought we'd get something pretty interesting. I've never had a drink with aloe vera specifically listed, so here we are.
Yeah. I mean, elevator chunks in this, right? Which is very cool.
Yeah, it sort of throws me off. It's not quite as big as the bubble tea chunks. I miss that feeling.
Yeah.
So, would you say that email is one of the best ways to meet investors? You craft the right message, you send an email. It could be LinkedIn, but often actually writing a message is, especially during a time like now where we have COVID-19. Email is still a pretty basic way to do it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way, if you look at online marketing and the way we're digesting information, it's really transcended into text, into message, right? And we are moving more into video. If you can do a video pitch, more power to you. But I mean, why I like text and why I like to email is because I read a really interesting stat, which is true, is that when you send an investor a pitch deck, they on average take about what 8 to 10 seconds to read it. That's it.
Hmm.
8 to 10 seconds to read a 20-page deck. How do you even do that? And so when you take a look at the fundamentals behind there, it's quick scanning at the four core areas, business model, market size, financial projections, high level, five years, and their ask, right? I mean, if you give me those four areas right now, I can tell if your company's going to be investable based upon how you're throwing that together. So, with that said, how do we articulate the same thing into an email pitch, right? And show exactly what we're looking for and what we're looking to gain out of that. And the best way, because we are so ADD when it comes down to information, because of social media in the world right now, is that email and LinkedIn are effective. You just gotta know how to do it right.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess to do it right though, like you really can't write a long message. Like everyone's got the too long didn't read sort of mentality right now. I am known specifically as someone who writes long messages. I think I can get away with it sometimes, but in terms of investors, like that's the one spot where you really, really need to keep it brief, hey?
Yeah, I mean, or break it up, right? Just break apart your sentences into smaller sentences. And, I have a pitch approach which goes 150 characters. Sometimes I've done like 300 characters, but again, it's broken up in a systematic way that shows every component of my deck in a really small little snippet.
Yeah. Makes total sense. So we were talking a little bit about how to reach out to an investor, what that process is like. Let's talk about should you reach out to an investor. So I understand that when you reach out to an investor, when you're actually ready to ask for the deal, so not starting the relationship, we're talking 6, 9 months later, you're seeing what a lot of us would call traction. You're seeing what we might call product market fit. I've always had a difficult time understanding what traction is, what product market fit looks like. I'll be happy to share what my favorite definition is, but I want to hear from your perspective because obviously you've raised millions of dollars for your own companies and for the companies of others. What would you say constitutes product market fit or traction, and are these words synonymous?
Yeah, absolutely. And the biggest difference between the two for product market fit is, have you found a niche in the market that resonates with your product? So we can go out there and we can create a widget, and we can go and start selling and marketing it. But is there a marketplace for that? Are people adopting it? Is it growing at a constant pace? Do we determine and distinguish where customers are and know them down to a T that we actually can sell it to them? So product market fit is knowing that you found a problem in the market and you actually have found a solution, know how to market that solution, and there's an area to be solved. Validation is getting some sort of proof that this is actually true, whether it be, and a lot of people think validation is just sales, but no, validation comes in the many powerful forms that are not sales, such as emails collected on your webpage for a pre-sign up, for instance, downloads for your app, page views for your webpage, depending on what you're doing here, partners signed up for your company that are ready to jump on when you get going here. Of course, revenue is another one, or really that anything that shows the uptake that people love this, and that could be PR mentions, that could be testimonials, really anyone that is ready to sign up and use your product here. And that is really important because as entrepreneurs, we love to focus on product only and development only. the number one thing you should always be focusing on in your company is sales. That's the hardest thing to get. My big mentality, and I love to talk about this down the line, but I always sell before I build. I always go in the market and sell my products, and raise the hundreds of thousands plus for them, and then determine, okay, it's time to build this. The market, there is product market fit. I've proven that, and then I've proven that with validation.
Yeah, when you go to an investor and you're looking to, when you say that your use of funds with an investor is to put toward product development, how do investors react to that though?
They hate that. They absolutely hate that, and a lot of them won't fund your startup just so you can build it. And so I get a lot of times like, well, how do I build it if I don't have money,
Right.
right? So that's what I did with TrapTap. We even before we even had a product, we had a napkin drawing. I downloaded a 3D modeling software, and I learned how to actually 3D create this product. And I pre-sold $750,000 of it within 45 days before even having it. The hardest part for us was like, oh crap, we have to make this now, right? And that matters. And when I went to my first investor with this, his name is Permjot, and I said, Permjot, I said, we are TrapTab. We have a small IoT gadget, blah, blah, blah. He looked at me, paused, and said, Bryce, cut me off in 20 seconds. Said, Bryce, this is the worst idea I've ever heard in my life, right? And I stood there just dumbfounded, just, super confused. And I knew right away the type of investor he was from that point on, right? It's traction, revenue, and validation points. So I stood there, smiled, looked at him, and said nothing else except the fact that in 45 days, we raised $650,000 for the product. He looked at me, blinked a few times, and said, okay, where do I invest?
Yeah, that was exactly the look on the eyes I saw when you went on Dragon's Den with your with your hardware startup, TrapTap as well. The dragons were kind of humming and hawing when you guys showed up, but as soon as you said the numbers, everybody took out their checkbook, and it's like nothing else mattered other than sales, hey?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. And like, again, people think they need to focus on sales, but like I mentioned before, you can get uptake in really any other way. You just need to prove you're not another crazy person with an idea and that other people want it, and that you have the right strategy to prove this product market fit. And that comes in the form of your pitch and your deck, and it needs to be done to a T.
Makes sense. What are your thoughts in terms of being able to show you have letters of intent versus sales? I know they're not as good. I know investors have different feelings about them. If we rewind the conversation a couple minutes, it seems like it's just a good traction point. It's just a good point of validation, right? It's not as strong as revenue. It's not as weak as downloads, but it's still pretty good, right?
It's perfect. Like any letters of intent, any purchase orders, anything you can show that, hey, by the way, I went out and did the hard work and I found a customer who wants to buy. We just need to build it now, right? Or we partially built it and people are ready to buy. I mean, that's the hardest part of any company is getting a purchasing customer, not building anything. I mean, there's some variation in there, but I mean, humor me for a bit here. It is that we focus too much on the excitement of building a new company and not the hard part of finding customers. We entrepreneurs love to focus on the $10 an hour jobs instead of the $1,000 hour jobs, which is actually finding your customer.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you sold your first, when you started getting sales for TrapTap, you said you got $750,000 in sales, which I believe was all done on Kickstarter, correct?
Kickstarter and Indiegogo, yeah.
And Indiegogo, you ran both platforms, and you didn't have a physical prototype when you did it. You guys had a really good 3D rendering and maybe some kind of spec of how it would work, or how far was the tech plan in action when you actually put your campaign out?
Yeah, so we 3D printed two circles and a clear circle to look like the device at all. And we glued it together. And then in our video, we hired a video company to do some post edits, so make it look like it's flashing. So it's all fake. Honestly, yeah, we had access to a 3D printer. We printed it for a couple bucks, glued it together, and then made it flash in the video. And if you look close enough in our Trap That video, the logo on top is just taped on and it's slightly peeling up. Like, I mean, for under $10, yeah, that's it. That's it right there for under $10. I mean, we have a prototype right there, and you can see the little curve. That's actually computer paper. I printed that logo off and just put a glue stick on the back and pasted it on.
So we're looking at something you guys 3D printed.
Yes.
Wow. And what about this one here? Still 3D, or that's a little bit
No,
later?
that's the real. That was one of our first iterations, but that's the actual product that we got manufactured with the lights in there.
Okay, I could definitely see a little bit of the difference, but at the end of the day, like this did the job, right? This allowed you to raise $750,000 off of essentially an idea and a promise you deliver a product, right? That's crazy.
Yeah, and that's really all you need is just mock-ups and a good pitch to make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. How was your experience like being on the Den? Were you scared shitless or how did that go?
Oh man, I like we mentioned before, I love pitching and being on Dragon's Den was such a great experience. Something that's interesting about there is that, we were in the den for an hour and a half, and a lot of people think it's just quick and over with, but being grilled with questions for an hour and a half, and it's all for TV.
Yeah.
Our pitch was cut up in a way to make it look like I couldn't do math on the show, which is really funny in some other areas. And so they cut it all together to make it great and viewable for TV. And even the way that they say that they're not on your into your deal is pretty comedic as well too. I remember one of the Dragons, yeah, right away to say, "I don't think you're entrepreneur, sir. I'm out," and then would just turn to the camera and smile. So a lot of it's staged, really. But it's really cool. It was a really cool experience. Our sales bumped up roughly about um, how much do we do this? I think it was something outrageous, 3,600% within a few hours of being on the show. It just skyrocketed
Yeah.
to the point where we were now dropping 5K a day in ads to keep up with it, and it was a phenomenal experience. Definitely a really great marketing tool.
Someone was telling me that it's like $50,000 of PR value of going on the show. Even if you don't actually do a deal, even if you shake hands on the show and you end up not closing the deal when you're looking at the term sheets, would you agree with that? Would you say like consider doing things like this with the mentality of getting as many eyeballs as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. We didn't go on the show to raise investment. We went for PR, ended up getting some offers, which made us want the investment, which just turned sour in the back end. I mean, they take advantage. Some take advantage of entrepreneurs, axe the deal, change the terms in the background. But from the marketing standpoint, majority go on there for the PR. And they even asked us that. They said, "Okay, be real with this, guys. Are you here just for the PR side of things, or are you looking for investment?" Right? And I mean, of course, we said investment, and deep down inside, that's really what we wanted. But it's a great marketing aspect.
Yeah, no doubt. So even if you didn't have the 750,000 in Kickstarter sales, would you have still wanted to go on Dragon's Den? I suppose to get on the show, you just need to be classified as interesting, hey? But I think it really helps to get on the show probably if you have some form of traction, just like a serious investor pitch, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we went into those auditions, and they're looking for something innovative, something interesting, something with traction as a storyline. And so we pitched it with a story. I pitched it with a story when I went there and I tried out for it. Waited in line for 6 hours and did that. And again, your pitch matters so much. And I remember talking to the producer when we got on, and she's like, "Okay, this is how we're going to do your pitch." And I said, "I've been doing this for years. I want to do it this way. I want to structure it like this." She's like, "No, not entertaining enough. You need to have props. You need to have this and this." So, in my mind, it was interesting, where I like to put the focus on the presentation and myself when instead it was on the environment. It was a bit of a flip, which I took a lot from that. And you're like, when you're pitching your pitch deck is a tool. You're the presenter. It should complement you. But everything around of how you involve your audience, how you walk up to them and talk to them, and how you involve your presentation is all a part of the experience. And it matters. It matters to the point where it changes conversions and interest and investment levels based on how you speak, your tone, your stance, your projection, and your visuals.
Do you think that that's kind of like a lesson for startups outside of Dragon's Den as well? Because for me, it seems to make sense. For me, there's a certain amount of showmanship in any type of business, whether you're talking about selling customers or selling investors, right? That's one thing I've noticed, especially as of late, being more active on channels like LinkedIn. If I want people to engage with my content, it's not always just about who has the smartest, most valuable content. People like entertainment.
Yeah, they really do. I mean, we want to talk about content strategy with LinkedIn. It's the same thing for your pitches as well too. How do you show that you're an influencer? An influencer means that someone is not bragging all the time, but shares external industry information, shares something about their culture and themselves, shares something about their business, and also shares milestones that you've accomplished.
100%. So when you were talking about your first investor that you landed, that was Permjot, is that correct?
One of them, yes.
Okay. That name rings a bell because I know you in my personal life. Was that an investor in a separate startup of yours before?
Yeah. He's second investor. Previous one was Advolve Media. He put money in.
Okay, because that's pretty interesting to me because that shows the long-term relationship with some of these investors, right? It's probably just like a customer. I really want to draw parallels between finding customers and finding investors because once you find an investor, you have an incentive to keep them happy because not only will they continue to buy products from you and invest in you, but they'll tell their friends, they'll tell others. I would hypothesize, I would guess that if this is a great investor champion who's been with you in multiple ventures, he's likely helped you find other funding. He's likely increased your credibility and you've already found him. So now you just have to keep him. Can you maybe share a bit of the roller coaster with this investor who obviously signed up for startup number 2 or 3 because of number 1? And I don't think you guys made that investor tens of millions of dollars on the deal. You guys had a relationship. How did that evolve over time?
People invest in people, and they always will, right? And you got to build that trust. And did we make that investor money our first startup? No, I'll tell you, we didn't. But I mean, they trusted, in myself and some of my partners as being reputable and trustworthy entrepreneurs based on our traction and how we dealt with them before. I mean, investors diversify their portfolio. They know they're going to lose money, but I mean, if you are doing things, pitching things, you're scaling, you're running things correctly, and it's not you as the entrepreneur. It's maybe the opportunity or the niche or the timing, which I think it's always timing. You're investable again, but you're right. Just like your first customer or your first investor, you need to start building these relationships. Your network is the most powerful thing that you're going to be owning. And if you're a young entrepreneur, build that up now, because when you're older and have less than half of the energy, you're leaning on your network in order to get business deals done or our investors. And it's kind of like the which I'm not sure if we talk about this, Luke, but the whole mentality behind find 100 customers who can pay you $100, right?
Yeah.
Or 100 customers who can pay you $1,000 annually, and that's your 100K. So you just find someone that trusts in you, build your influence around there, and then you're going to have a network of people you can lean on.
Yeah, well, to lean on an investor to the point where they don't make money with you on one deal and they come back for more speaks volumes to you and your co-founders. So that's phenomenal to hear that story. It's happened once with me and an investor too. I had to have that hard conversation where I went for a drink with this investor, very fitting, and and I broke the news to him. I don't think he was super surprised because our updates started to become a little bit more seldom. He understood that we weren't getting to where we wanted to, and actually it was a startup that was going to continue on. I just had resigned because of multiple reasons, and the investor didn't have high hopes of the startup succeeding necessarily, with the team kind of breaking up. And I remember that meeting very well, and it was the most flattering thing because he essentially said, word for word, tell me what you're doing next because I'm going to be investing in that one too.
Yeah,
And I just thought
yeah.
that was just unbelievable that if you just look at the facts, I cost this person money. We're not talking about $10, $20. We're not talking about $2,000. And he says that he believes in me and he'll invest the next time. That's the best thing anybody could ever say to you.
It's great. It's great. I mean, you obviously done a great job building on influence and thought leadership. Now on TrapTat side, if I want to sway away from investors, talk about customers. When I informed our customers were closing down, I had a lot of them say, "Great, let me know what you're working on next." Right?
The customers.
Yeah, which is really cool. So,
Wow.
we formulated our story in such a way to show, how we are improving, how we're growing and scaling, why we're investable, why things failed. And it puts the onus on, on the industry and more so on the opportunity and timing and less on yourself as a failure, right? So that's why it's super important to get your pitch down right to your customers and to your investors from the get-go. Build that relationship in the proper way, build your decks in a proper way that structures that relationship on the opportunity and not just the product, that highlights your team and your success so they invest more so in the opportunity and your team than the product itself. That's the best way of doing it. And that is a hard thing to do a lot of times in our decks, is just to convey our story and our thought leadership position.
Yeah, that's fascinating to hear. Do you want to share a bit of backstory in terms of how you had to get to that decision, how you had to kind of discontinue operations with TrapTap? You guys built up such a solid brand. The perception was everything was thriving. You had customers that were waiting by the door to receive their package, and and things went into that direction. How did you know that this was the right time to kind of admit things weren't working out? What signs were you seeing? Because honestly, I can't count on two hands how many startups keep pushing something that isn't necessarily working, that isn't going the way they want to. You have both sides of things. You have startups that don't know how to validate something, and then you also have a lot of companies that don't see the writing on the wall when it is time. What was your experience there?
Yeah, ours is like a bit in between here. We blew up so fast. Like in the first 9 months, we went from a napkin drawing, raised $750,000 in pre-sales, had our first 100K investment lined up, and already delivered to over 25 countries in 9 months. Think about
Wow.
that. Conceptualization from napkin drawing, pre-sales, delivered to 25 countries, and already investment lined up within 9 months, which is phenomenal. We had an unfortunate situation with the lead investor who had a heart attack. Thank God survived, but that kind of spooked on the rest of my team. We needed a bunch of money to scale and grow. So from there, it was a bunch of up and downs. Got on Dragon's Den. They put us in a price, like a fundraising freeze, which really hurt us as well too. And TrapTab was interesting. Google was coming out with their updates from their software, which was going to squash this a bit. Waze was also really big. We needed a bit more capital injection to do the next iteration of updates on the hardware. And at that point, I think it could have been something great if we would have pivoted, but my other teammates lost faith in it. And it wasn't worth their risk when it comes down to the families and lifestyle.
Yeah.
Being a single entrepreneur, it's easier for me to risk a lot more, but not for them. So when they started pulling out and we're having dead weight in that cap table, that was one of the hardest pitches ever, is how to raise money based on a team that was inactive.
You guys had
Uh,
six initial founders, six people on that
yeah,
top
yeah,
table. Is that something that you would concretely avoid doing it again, or
100%. We had such a smart team, such brilliant people, all ex-CEOs of the previous venture, which was also very difficult at the same time. How do you bring in six ex-CEOs into an venture, which, I was running by myself, and, all of them want to take charge and take control. And
that's a lot of confidence?
it's really difficult to manage a team on that side there. And I definitely failed at that. And I will admit that I wasn't the best CEO I could have been in that position here, against all odds. And, this started as a side project for all of us. And I jumped full in, and everyone started to come in. When things got hard, they started pulling out, and I couldn't do everything on my own. So that's kind of when we started diminishing. Problems started, happening, and we just couldn't sell enough to sustain the hardware costs.
Yeah, it makes sense. And then you said you reached out to your customers and you had to give them this hard news. Do you remember what you said and how you said it?
I'm still doing it today here. I do it in small batches, so because I'm still handling the customer service and going on, but just more so, thank you for support. Unfortunately, things didn't work out and have to close down. And a few people have owned their devices more than a couple of years, and so a lot of it worked great. I still use mine. At least some still work out in the market for sure.
Yeah.
And people still love it, and it sucks that it has to go. It makes me sad at the same time, but these people love the product, and they trust in us. And the reason they trust in us, and there's a sliding scale, and I don't have a source, but this is true, that when it comes down to trust in a company, when someone doesn't know who you are, the person they trust the least is the CEO, your team, internal members, your engineers, and then the person they trust the most is just reviewers. That's first time customer. So warm introductions are great. People reviewing your product are awesome. When they actually do invest or when they do buy your product, it's flipped. The person they trust the most is in the CEO, because they've got that faith and mentality, and they've got that relationship built up with the company and its brand.
Yeah. Yeah, I can understand that. So through all your experiences, you've been involved in many different ventures. It's very similar to how I have. You've learned how to find customers, how to lead teams, how to find first investors, and obviously that led you onto this track of building a course. And I just recently took your course, so I'm going to just share two screenshots. Here's what other people might see, but here's what I saw. So,
That's awesome.
yeah. So I had a lot of fun going through your course, and I thought it was really valuable. How much money have you helped how many companies raise? You're able to give us a taste of what you've been doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're surpassing 10 million right now, and I deal with a various amount of companies, U.S., Canada, and in the Europe area, which very, very awesome that I could deal with some amazing startups over there. And it's always, the same thing all the time is we have a pitch deck and we're pitching and it's not working, and then we really dive deep in their deck and they're missing so many things. Again, remember I said like 7 or 5 to 10 seconds on best to read your deck. If you can't convey what you need and what you want right away, that is an issue. And that resonates in how you present yourself on LinkedIn, how you type in your content, what you're saying in emails. So this course or this training is an ultimate investor training. I have now changed the name to, is that it's making sure you have the best pitch deck that covers everything in a way that tells your story in a way that you never thought you knew how to tell it. That's simplistic, that covers the traction point and metrics that you need in order to get investors to the next meeting. And it goes even further by offering the different investor documents, a lot of more questions that'll be crushed the Q&A period, and really start thinking deeply about that validation, traction, product market fit, and go-to-market strategy, which is some of the hardest questions that you'd be surprised some A+ entrepreneurs I'm talking to, and then I just rock the world by asking a small question and they don't know. And those are the issues with investors, is that if you can't instill confidence based on your pitch and some questions, you lost that connection.
Yeah. Yeah, you only have this one chance, right? And then you're sort of moving on. They have a short attention span. They're seeing so many deals. I think entrepreneurs always feel like they're special, but the investors see so many of you so frequently, can almost be overwhelming. So I guess you need to find a way to stand out. When you have a chance, you got to nail it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one thing that I found very interesting across all of your experiences, Bryce, is that you've you've constantly been able to surround yourself with opportunity. And I don't know how else to say that, but when I think of Bryce North and the different brands and projects that you're attracted to, you know, it's these projects always seem to have tremendous momentum and speed behind them. And they always seem like they're good picks surrounded by good people. And I think this is such an amazing thing. And I don't think it's luck. I think you've figured something out. You figured out how to find the right entrepreneurs to work with to help them raise capital, right? Anyone can find a client, anyone can find a project, anyone can find a startup, but it seems like you're finding the right ones. And then once you find them, you're able to execute with tremendous speed. So I'm patting you on the back for that. Do you have any thoughts behind it?
Oh, I appreciate that. And that's kind of how I do things. I mean, even when taking my course, the number one concern I get is your video course is only an hour, actually less than an
It's
hour.
not long enough.
And you know what? It was 5 hours and I filmed it. And I'm so malicious in that way that I actually cut it down to only what you need to hear. And I explain it with examples and showcases as well too. With this course, you also get, a couple one-on-one calls with me to go in greater detail if need, but how do you cut the crap is the biggest thing, right? And how do you do the BS sniff test when it comes down to partners and opportunities? And that only comes with experience, right? And so that's where I focus on, is condensing in the highest, most optimal performing areas and subjects and positions as possible. And I execute that productivity hack in my pitches, in my co-founders, my opportunity that I'm seeking. And that's just the point. It's just hyper driving and focusing on just what works, and just split testing, always split testing.
Yeah, always split testing. And it seems like you're also good at, I think every good startup figures out what the problem is, right? I think that's kind of at the core of everything that you're doing. One thing that I loved, I believe I got it from your course, is the idea of customer interviews. And this ties back to the customer conversation. But, I think you specifically talk about, don't pinpoint the solution, don't go in and tell the customers, this is what we're doing, what do you think? It's much better to take that step back and try to naturally see if what the need is matches up with something related to your solution. I think that's so important too, because we often go for feedback, and I could talk to my mom and my dad and my ex-business partner, and I can talk to my neighbor down the street, and I can talk to, that particular person on LinkedIn that's liking every single one of my posts and say, what do you think about my idea? Probably I'll get 100% positive feedback doing that,
Yeah.
but you're not going to learn anything, right?
No. So like a big mistake on that is that we go in right away, like you said, and say, what do you think of my product? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? And you're already positioning that product in the opportunity in their mind as a solution already. Where, for instance, if we want to talk about the first time Uber pitched people and we wanted to find out if their product or their solution was a great idea, instead of saying, what would you think about ride sharing? What would you think about cheaper costs? It's just more so, tell me about your morning commute, right? That is how you actually determine a problem and find out if something is worth pursuing and it's going to be working. Tell me about your average day. Tell me about how you get to work. Tell me about the worst part about getting to work. Tell me about what it's like leaving the office or going somewhere on the weekend. These are the interviews you want. So based on that, and segueing into your idea, what you think about your product, what I think about your product, what your friends think about your product does not matter, right? None of that matters. The only people that matter are your customers. So how do you have product market fit? How do you find your first customers? You talk to them. A great platform is Kickstarter. I launch everything on Kickstarter, and then I change the company name. I launch it on there. I find out the max price I can charge. I find what the feedback in the market is, what people are saying. Then I cancel it, right? And then I go back and then do those iterations, and I launch it
Your
on
relaunch.
Kickstarter or launch my own e-commerce or webpage again on that. So it's just collecting market feedback is the only way to do that in open-ended questions and loops, and in various ways that does not give across what you're working on. So the customer can come to the solution themselves. So the investor can come up with the idea that they want to invest themselves.
Yeah, so I want to double down on what we're talking about here, because I think it can be a gray area to some entrepreneurs, because you think that validation, you think that customer feedback is convincing as many people as possible to say, yes, I would like that product. It seems like that's true to a certain extent, but if you're fooling someone, you're only fooling yourself, right? If my goal today is to get 100 people to say, yes, I would buy this product, from one perspective, that's good validation. But from another perspective, if I went about getting those 100 yeses the wrong way, it's purely a vanity metric. I'm wondering if you can help me sort of come to a conclusion here, because I can definitely understand the difference. If you throw up a Kickstarter campaign with a different name for a short period of time and you get some people to subscribe to it, buy it, same kind of thing of going on to eBay and you put a picture of a product up that you don't own, and then you end up just refunding them once they click buy. Like that is pure traction, right? Because someone is clicking buy, they're committing money. Everything less than that is still traction, but it can be a gray area depending on how you did it. Any thoughts? Because if we think that traction is just getting people to say yes, we're kind of misleading ourselves.
Yeah, traction is we're getting people to say that they recognize an opportunity and they agree that there's a solution. We get traction is the fact that we're having people agree and convince the fact that they found a solution to the problem and that they recognize the problem is the biggest thing. So, I love setting up landing pages for sites and driving traffic there. I use how many people click on my ads, my click-through rates, my engagement, my subscribe rate as traction. And then I actually charge them. I use my revenue as traction points, which, you refund them later on. But these are all validation points and traction points to show that people actually, two things: show them that they actually are interested, but also that you did a proper job describing the solution and identifying the problem.
Yeah, totally. And I'd like to talk for a couple more minutes about the Kickstarter, because I know you mentioned that in brief, $750,000 in your Kickstarter. What did you need to do in order to raise $750,000 in Kickstarter? Because a lot of people are doing Kickstarter campaigns, and I think the idea that you have a product that looks good is not going to get you anything, there's a whole campaign side to it, isn't there? There's a whole amount of hustle you need to do. It's not throw up the campaign, have a good looking 3D rendering, throw together a good advertisement with some good copy, and you've got it. I believe that you set up a very detailed plan that probably articulated every single day what you were going to execute.
Yeah.
And you probably hustled your butt off for a period of 30, 45, 60 days. And then with all those other check boxes, with a good product, with a good idea, can you share what that period was like for you so that we can get a sense as to how hard you worked?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of funny because I consulted in this for the longest time, which in a sense, it's still pitching, right? You're pitching to customers on a site to convince them to buy. So the biggest and the most important part of your pitch is your of your campaign is your pre-campaign. So
Hmm.
what does that mean? Building up your email list, getting people interested, going through the process of building up your socials. When you launch in Kickstarter, you have 40 hours in order to get your goal to at least 50% funded so you start trending on the first page.
Hmm.
Trending gets you more views and more subscribes and more purchases. So is there a segue and similarity between your investment pitches and your first customer? Yeah, you need to build that pre-launch list. People who are interested, engage them, get them and say, we're not launching yet, but we are, this is what we're all about. So we worked a while to get, 10,000 plus emails, people who were interested or saw an issue with speeding tickets. And same thing with your product. If you're pitching investors who see an issue within this industry, where you're presenting a bit of a solution, or your customers who have that problem that you're talking about, and you get them on this list, and you can tease them and say we're about to launch, or to say we have a solution ready, this is what it is. So we focused on that. We built that up. We built up this audience. We built up a lot of social sharing and contesting so that would go a little more viral. And then when we launched, we hit all the major PR areas. We did a lot of advertisements, and we leaned on our backers, who are now evangelists. Evangelism marketing is massive. And if you get people
Yeah.
who truly believe in what you are selling, they are going to stand behind you and pump and promote and tell everyone about it. And we made that a huge part of our campaign.
So in order to get trending, you started with a pre-campaign, and
Yeah.
one key success in your pre-campaign was you already had a list of people and their contact information that were excited about your product.
Yeah.
And if I'm going to go back a step from that, how did you go about getting that list? Is it something that you had to pay for? Is it something that you guys did bootstrapping? Is it something that you asked friends and family, or how did you go about acquiring the list?
Yeah, so we're fortunate in the fact that we had access to a list of a similar not similar technology, but a similar space through our business partner. But we doubled on top of that and actually started bringing in people through ads, through our own social networks, to posting out there, getting on sites like Product Hunt, getting on other PR startup sites. There's millions of them. You just got to submit. Aside from TrapTap, I've done this at other companies where we start from zero, where we went and we built up our email list. And it's the same thing. Get your network, build up to 100 to 1,000 people, do social contesting and social sharing, and do giveaway campaigns that grows that and makes it go viral. So you actually can get the 10 to 20,000 people you need to start with.
Yeah, that seems like, a bit of that unfair advantage that you were able to build. And again, a part of that was, a part of it was unfair, right? You found a way to acquire information, which gave you a bump. And then you guys just hustled to build up that list. And I think a lot
Yeah.
of people think that you launch the campaign and you get that list once you start the campaign.
No, no, not at all. I mean, that list prior was from a different startup we worked on that failed, right? It was just, we worked hard to get that. So in relation to your investors and your first customers, investors say, what's your traction? Well, I don't have any. Well, you didn't do your pre-campaign. You didn't do your pre-investor campaign, all right? You didn't
Right.
go out and didn't get the traction points that you need, which is not impossible to do. So, I mean, it goes hand in hand with pitching early, building your investor email list, getting your customers. Like, this is why it's an interesting podcast, Luke, because you're talking about getting your first customers and these tactics. It goes hand in hand to getting your first investors.
I know.
Simultaneously, do it at the same time, build up your lists, and then you go to an investor and say, I have a list of people through Luke who want to buy my product. And I have a list of investors through Bryce. And now I can launch this the right way.
Yeah, there are so many similarities and that was one purpose of this podcast, was to see the crossover, right? And a lot of it is so similar. A lot of the things that we're talking about, the pre-launch lists, the idea of having some kind of deck that you're using to show off information, whether it's to a prospective employee, a prospective investor, it actually goes beyond just customer investor. We're talking stakeholder, right? And a
Yeah.
lot of it comes down to, simply understanding what the other stakeholder wants to see. The investor, you said, wants to see three things. The customer, figure out what they want to see. Same question I love asking a customer, is, you see this product right now, you've just given me a few ideas of how it can be better. After all that stuff, let's cut the crap. I love asking the question, if we change these things, if we did a bit of that, would you really consider buying? Or what do you need to see us do differently so this product would be a top idea on your list? You ask these kinds of questions, and you can throw
Hmm.
in a term like, oh, hypothetically speaking, just ask it nice and softly. And it's really a request for advice. But when you do
Yeah.
that, you get them imagining if they were a customer, if they were an investor. And you do
Ask for
those
advice, get investment. Absolutely, right?
100%. And you do
Yeah.
those things, and then all of a sudden, you're in a great position, right? All of a sudden, when a customer says that they have three concerns, and you're like, well, if I fix all three of those things, would you buy it? And they say yes. Well, that's a great person to double down on, right? That's a great
Hmm.
person to build a relationship with. And I would imagine it's the exact same with an investor.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about, customers, investors, our pitch decks, our presentations also should need to be used to sign on business partners. Also need to be used to get advisors, board members, interested parties, partners, channel partners. I mean, name it.
Yeah.
This is not just an investment portfolio. Sorry, an investment presentation. This is a marketing and sales tactic in order to get investment, to get partners, and to get customers.
Yeah, 100%. And, you know, and the more you do this, the better that you get. And you alluded to a fact that you had a previous startup that failed. Wow, I've never heard that story before.
A few of them, yeah.
I have about 10 of those sitting over here right now.
Yeah, yeah.
The interesting thing I've noticed, Bryce, and the more entrepreneurs that I talk to through these kinds of channels, the more I'm hearing the story of entrepreneur has a startup, it fails, and they take the remnants from that startup, apply it to a future startup, and they succeed because of that startup that failed. And it's very interesting. And in your situation, one of the main things in the failed startup that helped the successful startup, or the next one in any event, was contacts. And I've seen it be anything from, we take a contact list from one startup to another, to we take our physical software infrastructure. But it seems like most of the time it does come down to contacts and brand. Hey, I don't know if you would agree with that or not, but
No,
I've
I do.
seen that where, like, you have a great list of contacts. You're not really, you're not really making money on these people, but they love you and they respect what you're doing. And then somehow, directly or indirectly, that kickstarts you on your next thing. Whether you're building a brand, whether you're selling a product, whether you're doing a Kickstarter. And as I think we're both agreeing on, it's the art of the start. It's how do you get trending on Kickstarter? How do you get that boost in the first 24, 48 hours? And that's where I see, like, if you have a startup and it failed, I'd really look at the silver lining of what you can carry forward from that startup to another, because it might just be your reputation as someone who can execute. And it might actually be something a heck of a lot more. But I think entrepreneurs need to give
Hmm.
themselves more credit when something is done. Even if it's a failure, it's not all bad.
No, I mean, you need that. You need to lean on that to get to the next step, right? Failure opens more doors, trying opens more doors. And that's just the point of it. They say it takes 3 to 4 notches on your belt. When I say notches, as in failed startups, before you actually make it. And that's in the
Yeah,
valley. So, I mean, we're up in Canada, we're in different parts of the world, where it's going to be a lot more. So get those failures over with. Live, learn, trial, execute, crash, bomb, fail, and just take all that and try again. And honest to God, you're going to meet some people or one investor or customer who's just going to tell the world and be your evangelist, and that's where it matters.
100%. So you reference Silicon Valley, and, you know, and one of the ideas there is that you need to build a really big company that raises a ton of capital, and you need to do things on a scale that, you know, that are extremely, a scale that's extremely significant. Um, and I understand from the numbers, a lot of investors do want you to build a company at the specific scale of $100 million in revenue. So I want to ask you about that. I understand that a lot of companies want, or are attracting investors that, that have a particular EBITDA, that are looking at a particular type of revenue, and they're looking to get there in a particular period of time, right? Because the investors need a return. It makes sense. And I don't remember the exact equation, but investors invest on 10 and they expect one home run, and a few are, they make their money back, and the rest are duds.
That's just it pretty much. Yeah. So yeah, within that formula, I mean, when you're doing your financials, I mean, investors so year 5 revenues, investors expect your year 5 revenues to be in excess of $30 to $50 million, right? So they're looking to exit. They want to make 10 times their money back a lot of times, right? In some industries, but the average more so 3 to 5 times their money back. So when you take a look at that, your year 5 revenues need to be in the 30 to 50 million point, or that's 10x your EBITDA, just so they can make the return. And that is the focus that needs to happen for a lot of these companies, is that you need to have potential for high revenues. A lot of time in our pitch decks, we don't make the correlation between market size and financial projection size, and then go to market strategy. That's always a disconnect with every company that pitches. Yeah. I can look at your market size, your TAM and your SAM, and look at your financial projections and tell that, okay, well, either you're lying and boasting, or you're not the right team to make this happen, because you have zero clue how big the market and opportunity is from that. So investors want to make their money back, and you need to articulate that properly.
What's the difference between TAM and SAM, and why is SAM more important than TAM?
Your total addressable market and your serviceable addressable market. So your total addressable market, for instance, TrapTap could be the world, the 1 billion vehicles on the world. Where we're starting in servicing is just going to be USA, the 250 million vehicles. And so that's where it's really important. We show how big the opportunity can be, but we're logical, we're smart, and this is where we're starting. That's where your SAM comes into play.
Yeah, you're really talking about who you're servicing, right? Who, if I'm selling a product today, even though the Chinese market might be something in the future, I'm not prepared to ship my product from here to there today. So let's get it out of my TAM. Yeah. Let's focus on my SAM, or my serviceable addressable market. No, that's phenomenal. If you're a startup that doesn't see, at least in the 5 years, they don't see themselves building $100 million valued company, a company that's doing $30 to $50 million in revenue, what would you suggest they do? Does it mean that they absolutely can't approach investors? Does it mean that they need to find the right kind of investor? Is it just a matter of communicating the expectation? Hey, this is what we're doing, how we're doing it? Or are people just being too conservative and we should all shoot for the moon?
I think people are being too conservative half the time, or we think that we can't hit these revenues. We want, when I say we, investors want to see these numbers, and their opportunity is there. And if it's not, then you need to really consider, do you need money? And that's always the biggest question. One of the biggest questions I talk to companies about is, do you actually need investment? Because here's the truth. Timing is never an issue for startups, except for companies like Facebook, Airbnb, and Uber. But otherwise than that, timing is never an issue. So what? Your competition raised $10 million. You know what that means? Their burn just went up dramatically.
Right.
Okay. Well, they've paved the way in the market. There's place and room to share. If you don't have a huge revenue company and you don't need to grow quickly, then take your time in building that up. Essentially what you need to be doing, and start creating additional products or additional markets and growing, your average order value of your customer, which increase the actual revenue of your company here. So do the analysis. Do you really need money? What do you need that money for? Is there really that rush to make that happen? And if you're going through your raise and there is a rush, then usually that means there's a huge opportunity and timing to the market, which you're going to have access over 100 million by year 5 for sure.
Yeah, so the opportunity is usually there, right? We just need to look for it. But I always do tell people, you should be aware, if you're going to raise funding, be aware that you need to operate differently than before you raised funding, right? I think there needs to be a certain amount of awareness, because as soon as you take someone's money in the form of an investor, in the form of a structured VC, then all of a sudden there's an expectation, and all of a sudden you basically have a job, right? You have to perform for these people. It's a little bit less independent perhaps than the bootstrapping startup that maybe they don't have that revenue to scale, but they can do things exactly how they want to. They don't need to feel like someone's looking over their shoulder. So I always tell people, like, if you're going to raise venture capital, understand what you're signing up for. And I guess be aware what investors you take money for too, because I guess we shouldn't say that all VCs are created equal. We shouldn't say that every VC is the same as every other type of investor, because you might have a family and friends angel investor that has very different expectations than a committed professional angel that might be different than a professional VC. Could you articulate something about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, on the inside of every angel firm, well, we can say more so a VC venture capital firm,
Yeah.
they measure companies the same way. And that
Okay.
is usually just, do they have the metrics and are they performing, right? Do they have $100,000 annual revenue so far, or $20,000 monthly recurring revenue? Are they growing at least 20% week over week? Month over month in that case there. I mean, a lot of them look and compare companies the same way. And these are your traction or validation topics and points that you need to hit in order to be screened to go through. That's just it. But when it comes down to the actual angel and the investors themselves, just like when you're prospecting and when you're building up your list, you need to profile these people and exactly find out exactly what they're interested in, the type of investor they are, and what they're looking for. And that's huge. And that's always overmissed. We can't pitch everyone the same. We can't give everyone the same deck. And that's why I go into great detail about how to actually properly do that. And that's important. What does an investor want to see? Are they a smart investor? Or are they a dumb investor? And by dumb, I don't mean intelligent, but I mean inactive to the point where they won't add value by being an active person in the company. Or in other ways, we call it silent money, right? Are you taking in money and not needing their input? Are you looking for someone as a strategic partner and advisor in your company? We need to know this because our pitches do change because of that.
Yeah, you got to set that right expectation. And the pitch changes just like it would for a customer. It needs to change for an investor. I think if you're copying and pasting the same message to every person at all times, first of all, they're going to notice and they're not going to appreciate it. And second of all, you're going to leave a lot of value on the table, right? And I know it's the same way when you deal with customers. I want people to know that I specifically wrote something for them. It takes a lot more time, but until I'm doing $30 to $50 million a year, I don't think me not having enough time to individually address my customers or investors should be an issue.
Yeah, I agree with you on that 100%.
Yeah. So there's a lot of startups right now, Bryce, as a final parting idea, there's a lot of startups right now that are trying to figure out how to get to product market fit, and they're not there yet. And I know that they're not there yet because if they were, they wouldn't be struggling, right? I think when you get to product market fit, it's pretty clear when you're there and things start to really align. And by the way, I didn't mention before, but my favorite definition of product market fit is the understanding that when you give your product to someone and you take it away, are your customers pissed off at you? So if you give somebody a product and you take it away and they have no reaction, it means that they didn't really need what you were doing. It meant that maybe you're extremely replaceable with something else. It meant that you're just a nice to have and not a need to have. But if you give something to somebody and they start using it and then you take it away from them, if that reaction is a whole bunch of emails, a whole bunch of angry voicemails, a whole bunch of crying and complaining, that probably means that what you did is valuable, right? I could think of a number of different products and services in my life that if you took them away, it would just be a fundamental shift in how I structured my day, right? I couldn't do things the same. And it doesn't need to be a big, shiny, expensive product. I use a particular Chrome extension that allows me to suspend my tabs because I'm one of those guys that likes to have 75 tabs. If you took that away, I wouldn't be able to use the internet the same way, right? I'd have to figure out if there's a different browser extension or some other way to operate. So I don't know if you like that idea, but I've always liked that thought where you want to have that stickiness with a customer where you know what you have is important. And, ideally you're seeing the stickiness over a long period of time. I'm not saying that you should take away something from your customer, but if you feel like if you did take it away, they'd be pissed off, I think you're doing something right.
Yeah, I mean, like, again, it comes back to if you found a solution to a problem they can't solve, and that's a problem in their life, they're going to be upset if they no longer can solve that, right? So be that solution. And again, the only way to really find out exactly what that is to start grilling them and question them and make them feel like that is a big problem, unless it's, already is, and that they've come up with a way to solve it by using your product.
Yeah. Do you have any parting words of wisdom, Bryce, uh, for the entrepreneur out there that's got a startup that's been operating for perhaps a couple years, it's reaching a fork in the road where they just don't have enough cash and they haven't raised that round? Would you be able to suggest one of the number one things that perhaps they're overlooking? What would you do if you were them?
Honestly, I mean, and I'm not just to plug my training here, but take my course. Really, because at that point there, it goes through everything and all the mistakes that everyone's making and aligns you up for that pitch and then for that investor outreach. Again, we talked about how it's structured, online for investors, but it's also meant a lot for customers, for partners, and everything else. So if you're in that fork, in that road, and don't know what's going on, that training actually will take you uh, through that decision process and help you kind of narrow down what's going on and where it's going wrong. And more importantly, it comes with calls with me so we can talk this over and find out what issues you're having. I've had clients say that I can't find out people love my product. If customers really want this, is this even a good idea? I've had clients say I can't get investors through to me. I can't take my business partners won't take me serious. This all can be figured out just by going down the process of finding out how you're pitching yourself, your company, and your opportunity, and if you're really recognizing your problem correctly.
100%, Bryce. And I got your personal website up on the screen here. I don't know if this screen means anything to you, but I guess I failed. I knew what I was doing, but I failed to sustain myself. I owned brycenorth.com for a period of time. I know I had a picture of Ron Jeremy swinging on a Miley Cyrus wrecking ball meme, and I did that, and then the domain came up for renewal, and I didn't scoop it up for a second or third year in a row. And now I see you have your domain. So if I would have just kept it a little while longer, might have been able to convince you to pay me a couple $100 or a couple steak dinners, hey?
Honestly, yeah, you really could have. And I remember you had that up there. I wasn't too happy. It was super funny, but I made a note on my calendar when that expired and didn't see an auto renewal. So I definitely snap bought that when it came available.
Well, good. Well, despite the fact you've beat me in multiple pitch competitions, despite the fact that you snuck out and you got your domain back from me at just the right moment. I've always have the utmost respect for you, Bryce. If people want to reach out and get in contact, how do they do it?
Yeah, best ways, you can email me at hello@brycenorth.com, or you can go to don'tbealittlepitch.com and there's a little chat in the bottom right hand corner. You can click at that and communicate with me live.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot for having the chat today, Bryce. I hope we do it again, and it'll be very interesting to see how our brands collide and can collaborate, because we're talking here about the First Customer Club. Heck, what you're doing could be called the First Investor Club. So a lot of parallels, a lot of learning, and as we talked about today, a lot of the shit is actually the same.
No, very true, right? So thank you so much for having me on. Like a lot of similarities, a lot of cross collaboration going to happen here. So I look forward to what opportunities are available in the future for us.
Take it easy, pal. Thanks again. Bye
All
bye.
right, cheers. Bye bye.